Hello, everyone, and good morning. My name is Ann Rogers, and I am a junior at the University of Florida and a current intern at the Luce Center. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing you to Emily Jashinsky. Along with being on the Luce Center's Board of Advisors, Emily is a journalist and cultural critic who currently serves as the DC correspondent for Unheard and co-host to the Counterpoints podcast. Originally from Wisconsin, Emily attended the George Washington University and was active in her YAF chapter there. Once she graduated, she launched her journalism career, and for nearly 6 years, she served as the culture editor at The Federalist, where her interviews with politicians and entertainers reached audiences nationwide. She previously covered politics as a commentary writer at the Washington Examiner, and her work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, The Hill, Real Clear Politics, and the New York Post. Emily is also a frequent guest on major television programs, including Fox News Sunday and C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Beyond journalism, she's made a major impact on mentoring the next generation of writers as the former director of the National Journalism Center and a senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. Most recently, she launched After Party with Emily Jashinsky, a podcast produced by MK Media that explores news and culture in a fun, big-picture manner that can't be found anywhere else. Please give a warm welcome to a sharp thinker, fearless commentator, and one important voice in the national conservative conversation today, Emily Jashinsky.
We were just having a sort of fierce last-minute debate backstage about whether if it was good for me to bring my coffee out. And I was like, it doesn't matter because I'm doing it. And I spied the shelf on the podium. So it's all good. Everything worked out perfectly. Thank you all for being here. Of course, thank you to the Luce Center for everything that they do. Thank you to the wonderful Kimberly Begg, who has been such a great mentor and supporter over the years. We overlapped when Kimberly was at Young America's Foundation, and I was just a young college graduate. So I'm always really happy to speak to this group, to speak to you women, and you're here, and that's something that I think you deserve credit for doing in the first place, to sort of think through some of these important questions right now. So that's what we're going to do, but we're going to do it through the lens, particularly of the media. It's an easy topic to talk to relatively young people about. I'm not that much older than you. Probably I think I was talking to the Luce interns a couple of days ago, and it was about 12-year difference, something like that, so roughly. But it makes a big difference now because the rate of technological acceleration has gotten so astoundingly, head-spinningly fast. And it's so fast that it's easy for us to not even notice how fast. You're sort of like a fish doesn't know it's in water, right? But I was talking to the interns the other day about how when they were born, this is going to sound really silly, particularly to Kimberly and others who are in a generation beyond me. That's the most euphemistic way I can say you're old. But it's okay to laugh. It's fine. I'm not being mean. I can be mean, but I won't. So all that is to say, when you all were born, you probably remember Wi-Fi sort of as oxygen, right? Like it's in the air that you breathe. You probably don't remember that sort of tether to a network. And you may not have even thought about that as interesting before, right? That you were born into a world with Wi-Fi and very quickly afterwards smartphones that had social media apps loaded onto them. I don't know if you guys have actually even thought about that necessarily before, but just being 12 years older, roughly, than many of you, that is dramatically different than the world that I grew up in, where these social media platforms did not exist at all. And you still had to go upstairs. And this, again, if you're older than me, this sounds foolish to talk about this sort of nostalgically, but you had to go upstairs to a computer that was plugged in and to dial up internet and had to hear this weird sound and wait a minute for the computer to connect to the internet. And it was a whole process. There was much more friction between the internet and you. So what does this have to do with media? What does this have to do with journalism? Well, the story of journalism is the story of technology. You've probably heard the axiom from Marshall McLuhan. Even if you don't know who Marshall McLuhan is, you've probably heard the medium is the message, right? Has anyone heard that before? Okay. You should be reading McLuhan if you haven't, but that often gets misconstrued as meaning something like the style of the message changes with the medium, right? So it's different, you know, if any of you are doing, like, you're studying marketing or social media or something like that, you may have learned, right, that you post something different, and everybody knows this. You post something different on Twitter than you do on Instagram, right? And so that's how this very simple phrase often gets misconstrued, that we change the style of speaking from one format to the other. But what McLuhan was actually saying was that the substance of the message is different because of the medium. It's not just about the style. It's about the fact of the medium changing the substance of what's being said. So when journalism is print newspapers, when journalism is partisan leaflets back at the founding of this country, when radio as a technology comes along, which has been the blink of an eye in the scope of human history, that we have had radio, let alone television. I often use the example of Betty White. You probably all know who Betty White is, oddly enough, from TikTok. People know who Betty White is. So Betty White, I think, passed away at the age of 99. It was a couple years ago. Betty White was on an experimental, the first time that woman was on television, I think it was like 1937, 1939. It was an experimental broadcast of a new technology called television. And she passed away in the age of TikTok. They were experimenting with broadcasting to television when she started, not just when she was an infant, but when she was literally starting her career. Think about that. I think she was like 17. Think about that. So journalism has come along for that ride. Whenever there's a new medium, journalists will be on it because journalism is about communication. Journalism is about the news. Very basic, very simple, new information, right? That is the core of what news is. Therefore, your job is to communicate new information. And so when it was radio and when it was television and only, 3 or 4 networks had broadcast licenses, there was less competition for our time span, or for our attention spans, right? So you sat down to watch the nightly news, you had a couple of other choices. You could choose not to watch the nightly news and maybe just stick with the paper that you got that evening, or you could choose to listen to the radio broadcast, which is probably pretty similar, and you're choosing from the same, few networks. But you had to compete for a bigger slice of the American public. What does that mean? Well, it means that you don't want to look like you're super, super liberal or super, super conservative, because you don't want to alienate viewers. You want to get, when 60% of Americans are sitting down for the evening news, you want to get a big, big chunk of that audience. And so you need to appeal to a wide swath of the public. And that changed very recently. We sort of think of the media as what it was in like 1970, but even that, what we're thinking of is mass media, post-war mass media, when there were just a few broadcast licenses, and then cable came along, and then magazines really got big, and you were circulating things really quickly, and Vanity Fair was giving journalists expense accounts to fly around the world and shower their sources in champagne and whatever else. But that changed within like the last 10, 15 years, and it feels gradual. If you're a news consumer, especially if you're a journalist, you look back and you're like, oh, back when I was young, we could buy our sources Dom Perignon at Off the Record, and we would get all the best scoops. But it's not really that gradual. It's happened very, very quickly, and the world is completely different now. So here's another example that I use. Who knows who Johnny Carson is? Okay, yeah, it's usually not many young people know who Johnny Carson is, even people my age. So Johnny Carson, king of late night. In Johnny Carson's era, he was the most popular, he was the king of late night, most popular host, and he was not apolitical. He talked about politics all the time. He wasn't partisan. Why? Because you want, it's the famous Michael Jordan phrase, Republicans buy sneakers too, right? You want the Republicans and the Democrats to be able to sit down and have some fun at the end of the day and have some levity. So you can be political, you just can't be partisan if you want to get that big chunk coming back night after night. During the first part of the first Trump administration, who was the most popular man in late night news? It was Stephen Colbert, who is arguably the least funny man on television and the most political, the most partisan man on television. Why? What explains how he was able to be the king of late night during that first part of the Trump administration? I think it's actually Greg Gutfeld now, despite being the most partisan. Gutfeld is fairly partisan too, right? He's openly conservative. What is happening that a cable network is beating a broadcast network, let alone with these open ideologues? It's because to win the late night host wars now, you need to get like 3 million viewers a night, maybe less than that. When it was Johnny Carson, we were talking north of 10 million viewers a night, sometimes even more than that. Do you see what that means? Do you see what that means for the way that we are communicating? Think about that. If you can get advertisers, if the way to get lucrative ad space is to get 2.8 million people tuning in night after night, what are you going to do? You're going to cultivate a loyal base, right? You're going to want those resistance wine moms saying, I can't miss Colbert because at my book club, when we're reading Anti-Racist Baby, I need to have that cultural cash, right, to be able to have this conversation. Think about that. It's the exact same thing in the world of journalism now. It has advantages and it has disadvantages, of course. I have never been more optimistic about media than I am right now, and I have actually never been optimistic about media, period. And media is really everything. Media is, think about it like, it is our primary window into public affairs. And I use this terrible analogy all the time, and I'm going to use it on you too, so forgive me. But if you're at a zoo and you're looking through a glass window at a beautiful red parrot, but the window is all cracked and smudged. If you're on the left side of the window, it's cracked. If you're on the right side of the window, maybe it's smudged. So you kind of have to look around, right, to see the truth of the shadowy image behind the glass, right? You're trying to look at it from different angles. You're maybe standing on your tiptoes, and you're trying to look around the cracks and the smudges. That's what we do when we read the news now, right? Maybe you can find one really clear section and you can scrape it with your elbow. You know what I'm saying? That is journalism. That is our primary window into public affairs, and it is all cracked and it is all smudged. So we have to put extra effort in now to understand, to see the parrot for what it is, the beautiful red parrot for what it is. You have to say, well, okay, this crack is there because the left put it there for this reason. Or maybe even the right put this smear here for one reason or another. They just really don't like Joe Biden or whomever it is. If you're trying to read information about Zohran Mamdani on a conservative website, you may say, okay, well, they don't like socialism. So that's where that smudge came from. Good reason to put a smudge there. But nonetheless, you have to put in way more effort now. And one of the things about the mediums changing, you used to sort of have to seek out the news, right? I mean, somebody might mention something about the news at a barbecue or whatever, but if you weren't interested, it didn't matter. Now, say you are not super interested in the news, but you're on TikTok, you're on Instagram, you're on X or you're wherever, you're on YouTube, say you're on YouTube. And the algorithm knows that you're not super political, but one day you're just not spending a lot of time engaging with content. What's a really good way to get you to spend more time on the website? Let's feed you some political content that's going to make you really angry or really amped up, really happy, that you're going to agree with or you're going to hate. And that happens all of the time. It happens with literally every single person who is on social media. You're just trying to see pictures of your friend's cat or baby, depending on the stage of life they're in, maybe both. And you're inundated with the political news. If you're someone like me, and probably many of you, you love that, right? It makes life really easy because it's all blended into one. Every time I'm going to, see what Real Housewives news my friends are sharing with me, I'm also getting news about Zara Mamdani or whatever else because it's being pulled right into my feed. Isn't that interesting? You can't really escape it or avoid it, and it's been gamified by these algorithms. Believe it or not, how's this for the medium as the message? Twitter, when it first started, was a literal timeline. That's where the word timeline comes from. Algorithms have nothing to do with time anymore. There's nothing chronological about any one of your feeds, unless you have like an old school RSS feed. Do you even know? Nobody even knows what that is. But Twitter used to be if someone tweeted at 10:01 a.m. and then someone tweeted at 10:01 a.m., they would show up one after the other. You could actually scroll to the bottom of your Twitter feed. I know because I did it many times. You could get to the bottom. You can't do that anymore because there's something called infinite scroll, and the algorithm will keep pumping out content to make you spend more time so that they can sell more ads and more data, right? Think about that. What does that mean for the way journalists are communicating? Well, it means that if you want to push your content in a way that gets clicks so that you can sell ads, that you can expand your subscription base, what are you doing? Well, you're cultivating a niche. And that niche means that you can be more transparent about your biases, right? Colbert doesn't pretend he's like straight down the middle, neither does Gutfeld. So you can be more transparent with your audience about where you're coming from. But it also means, even if you're not trying to, you know what works and what doesn't. And you get in the habit of publishing things that you think are going to do well on X, or things that are going to do well on YouTube. I'm dealing with a couple of YouTube channels, and the way that you do that content, even when you're trying not to, it's always, you can't get that out of the back of your head, that when you're deciding what to cover, that's called selection bias, when you're deciding how to cover it, do you go for 10 minutes or an hour? What's the algorithm saying that day, right? And whether you're going for 10 minutes or an hour fundamentally changes the message that you share. So 10 years ago, I would go on Fox News and talk about something for 3 minutes, same topic, versus now you can talk about something for an hour, same topic. And to go back to McLuhan, it's not that we're just changing the style, right? You're not just truncating your comments into a shorter time period. No, you're having a fundamentally different conversation about if you're talking for an hour, the basics, and you're talking in conversation with somebody and expressing good faith, hopefully, right? Like it's just, you're not trying to can't cram it in between commercial breaks in a way that's good for the numbers. On cable news, they're watching second by second, people tuning in or out. These things just matter a whole lot. And on YouTube, more often, it's like who's staying on, it's called retention. And some of you are probably studying that in school right now. It's like who's 5-10 minutes. This really is changing it's changing the incentive structure, and that's changing the message itself, not just the style of the message, but the message itself. So in some sense, it's making us more transparent and more honest. But in another sense, it's also completely gamifying the way that we communicate with each other personally. We could have a long conversation about that, and people have written books about it, and it is, since you have one of these internet boxes in your pocket with you all the time, it's something that you should think very deeply about. But for the purposes of this conversation, it's changing our politics and our culture radically in ways that are hard for us to detect because we're the fish in the water, right? We're swimming in the ocean. We don't even know that we're wet. So something really, really important to think about. These apps, YouTube, X, were designed by people who had experience in Las Vegas, right? Like some of the early design mechanisms. Like, why are notifications red? Because we were evolutionarily programmed to have a different reaction to the color red. We're triggered by the color red biologically. So they're designed in ways that are manipulating us psychologically, and they gamify the discourse. And so it's really hard for the media to not play that game. But I think the biggest thing we can all just acknowledge And I think trust in media would skyrocket overnight if everyone just admitted they were playing the game, right? But the media never admits that. You still get the New York Times and the Washington Post. Well, Washington Post is a little bit different now because Jeff Bezos has come in and said, editorially, at least, on our opinion side, we're pro-free markets and whatever. We'll see. But New York Times, Atlantic, wherever else, Politico, Axios, they still just don't admit. If they came out tomorrow and they said, listen, we're center-left educated elites and we see the news that way, fine. But they still pretend that they are neutral, unbiased observers of daily politics, and they still cover it like they are obviously completely on the left. And that is what is infuriating. And this is a good point to start transitioning to questions on. And it's a really, I don't know why I'm optimistic, because it's such a depressing thing. Maybe I'm optimistic because I think the numbers are going to change soon. But Gallup, since the mid-1970s, has been doing a poll every single year on trust in mass media. In 2017, trust in mass media hit a record low. Why? Well, there's a pretty obvious reason why. The host of Celebrity Apprentice waltzed into a presidential primary and media said he couldn't win. Then he became the candidate and he was going up against the former Secretary of State. The media said he couldn't win, and he did. So you can understand why trust in media would hit a record low in 2017. And at the time, I remember seeing that and being like, this is actually great, right? Like, this is the addict hitting rock bottom. You have to do that before you recover. That's the sort of glimmer of hope in all of this. If trust in media were high right now, I would have a concern. Like, it needs to be low. If people were believing this stuff, that would be a problem. So after that happens, earth-shattering here in Washington. I mean, I cannot emphasize enough it was. Everyone here was so confident that it was impossible. Imagine that. And it happened. And it's just hard to even go back in time and think about the before times, right? It's crazy. You guys sort of are used to it because it's been the last 10 years of your life. Here, it was unthinkable that you could say one of the things he said, let alone all of the things he said, and still win the vote, be elected, and become president. So, okay, 2017, it's going to go up. It did go up a couple of years after 2017, but then record low in 2023, once again. Record low in 2024, once again. The media has had almost a decade to course correct. And trust in mass media is once again at record lows, where it belongs, by the way. After Russia collusion, after all of that, the Me Too movement, all of that, the media is still nosediving somehow back to those record low levels. And it's fundamentally because they cannot see their own biases. Many of you are not from New York and DC. I grew up in Wisconsin. I remember watching the way that they covered guns, abortion, religion, and it just drove me crazy. Because it was insane. I mean, it was just, they don't know anybody. There was a hilarious Twitter dust up back in like 2014 where someone posted that the Ford F-150 was like most popular truck in America, and a bunch of journalists were like, no, that doesn't sound right. Dude, if you spent any time like an hour west of your own city, you would not question that for a moment. But these little things are replicated at scale, right, on more substantive issues. They don't know many people who go to church every Sunday. They don't know many people who are very opposed to abortion, but they know a lot of people who are very supportive of abortion, right? And Charles Murray documented this as a social science in a wonderful 2012 book called Coming Apart that I recommend everybody read. It's the most important book about journalism that has nothing to do with journalism, but it's also one of the most important books about politics, period. And you start to see how this elite sorting process of people who are educated and affluent, which will probably be a lot of you, tend to cluster in certain niches. Wealthy suburbs of Chicago, wealthy suburbs of Washington, D.C., LA, New York, and don't know people outside their bubbles anymore. And that's why the media can't recognize their own bias. That's why they're nosediving, but that's why independent media is thriving. Again, there will be advantages and disadvantages to it, but I'm feeling really optimistic about that right now because at least there's a modicum of transparency. So on that note, let's move to questions. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you so much for your time. What an honor. I'd just like to say this CVL interns actually got to have lunch with Emily last this week. And it was such a blast to just bombard you with questions then. But now we'll have even more questions now. So if you have any questions, please line up behind me and state your name, school, and organization.
I'll stare you down and wait. It doesn't bother me.
Thank you so much, Emily, for talking to us. My name is Georgia Chapa, and I'm a student at Texas A&M University, and I'm a donor relations intern for the Heritage Foundation.
Oh, nice.
So you're talking about how technology has just revolutionized our world, and the rate at which it is advancing today is just exponential. Like, we wake up and AI has just, like, every second, crazy. So what role do you think AI has right now? And, you know, they're just so hard to even comprehend what the world is going to look like, even in a year. So how do you think AI is going to impact journalism?
Mm-hmm. Get this question a lot. I think in terms of the labor force, it won't be devastating. It'll wipe out probably that bottom layer of people when you're 22 years old and your job is to quote unquote aggregate stories. So you're not the one breaking the news. If NBC News breaks a story, there's a 22-year-old at ABC News that writes it up, and we call that aggregating and says NBC News reported this. That I think will probably be outsourced to AI. So labor force probably will be some cuts, but not as devastating as others think. On the other hand, and this is where the labor force may actually even make up for it, there's going to be so many videos and so much audio that is fabricated because of the increasing power of AI that you're going to need a lot more people to like be fact checking this stuff constantly and verifying whether it's real or not. So that'll create some jobs, but also like just more importantly, our institutional trust, I don't see it really recovering anytime soon, partially because of AI. It's like if something looks exactly like it came from CNN and it goes viral before anyone's able to say, well, this was not actually CNN. Or did any of you see the clip? This was wild. This one really shook me. Someone made an AI clip of the ICE protests turned riots in LA. Did anyone see this? Yeah, okay, yeah. So there was a person out doing a man on the street interview and talking to people, and it actually looked exactly like a real video until the end when it was very obviously AI. But we're at the very, very early stages of this. That thing went viral because people usually watch like the first 20 seconds, don't get to the end, and thought it was real. And this is at the very, very early stages before anyone fact-checked it and said, not real. So I think the way that very clever people are going to manipulate us is by making things that look kind of real or believable, and then you insert like a kernel of something that you're planting into the discourse or planting into the news cycle, and it goes viral before anyone can correct it. So that's gonna be really tough for journalism to deal with because that's new information. It's not real information. It's literally fake information that's being pumped into the public, and there's nothing you can do about it. So that'll be tough for consumers. It'll be tough for journalists. I don't have a good answer to it, but be thinking about it because awareness, consciousness, that's just how it's our best bet at getting through all of this is looking at it through the filter of awareness that it could be fake. Does that make sense? It's a horrible, unsatisfying answer, but it's what we have.
Hi, Emily. Thank you for being here. My name is Maggie McGee. I go to Hillsdale, and I'm with Conservative Partnership Institute. And my question is about TikTok, because I think there's this tension on the right now. Obviously, TikTok is making us more stupid, and they're farming our information.
I like how you said
everything
obviously.
Like that.
Yeah.
But also, I would argue that TikTok allows for a really broad dispersal of alternative media and alternative information. I think we saw in this past election that a lot of the clips of Trump and J.D. Vance going on these more popular podcasts, the clips of that went viral and caught the attention of a lot of young people. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that tension there.
So many thoughts on this. Because TikTok is obviously a weapon of war in the hands of a hostile foreign power like we have never seen on a comparable scale before. It's unbelievable what China could theoretically do if, say, there was an invasion of Taiwan tomorrow. Not impossible, by the way, but say that happened. And American soldiers' lives were on the line, immediately China could be flipping switches in the algorithm without us knowing at all. We would have to rely on leaks to journalists in order to have any idea, or just their transparency, which of course they're not going to do, to know that they're flipping levers of social control. And we could get into the question about whether they're using TikTok to addict kids to drugs and porn and other things. But the fact of the matter is, like, you could literally have American lives on the line and have China pushing out fake information that is, making it hard for the elections. For example, TikTok for a while was pushing people to register to vote. Think about that. It sounds so innocent, right? But that means that TikTok then has the data on where concentrations of people who are likely to be Republican because they're engaging with a bunch of Trump content live. And if there's a bunch of fake stuff coming out on an election day, pump those videos over to the Trump voters, right? Or the likely Trump voters. Like, this is an insane tool. On the other hand, Trump himself recognized that he was going massively viral on TikTok, and suddenly these numbers of young men in particular, but young people in general, that were supportive of Trump, that is, you talk to anybody who's been involved in like the broader conservative movement for a while, working in the conservative youth movement 10 years ago, my jaw would have been on the floor if you showed me those numbers in 2015 and said it would be 2024. I would never have believed it. So on the other hand, though, what that means is it could switch back the other way really quickly, because just the rate of change is whipping us back and forth with the algorithm. So I think basically, sadly, what we've realized, at least in the media and in like conservative world or liberal world, is that you have to, apart from the regulatory structure, which is important, but if that's not your issue, you have to now learn to adapt very, very, very quickly, or you will be ceding entire spaces. As awful as those spaces are, and as much as the regulatory structure needs to be changed, you can't cede them in the meanwhile. I was totally wrong about TikTok on that front. When it first came out, I remember at the Federalist, we were having internal conversations about whether to get on TikTok or not. And I was like, we are not doing it because it normalizes this. And I think I was actually, in retrospect, wrong about that. I'm not positive that I was wrong about that, but the younger people on staff were like, you don't understand. Like, it is everything. It is life. It is our water. But it is. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I also am not totally sure what to think. I think that TikTok really did actually help Trump win the election, quite frankly. But also, as you said, it could very likely be a weapon of war. And so I think I'm still trying to figure out what I think about that. But I appreciate your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And it's okay to not know. This stuff happens so quickly,
Yeah, thank you.
Good question.
Thank you. We'll have one last question and then photos very soon afterwards.
Sounds good.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. My name is Reagan Baird. I go to Mississippi State. I'm interning at Conservative Partnership Institute in Chip Roy's office. My question is that you said you're super optimistic about like how fast news is basically being pumped out. I honestly feel like a lot of people are getting like what I would call like news fatigue, where it's just so much information all at once. And I think that this could eventually maybe lead people to not take journalism as seriously as you would want people to take it. Do you think that there's a possibility where it just kind of becomes, you just scroll, you read, and you move on, and it doesn't really affect society anymore?
Yeah, I think it's already happened. And I think it'll be a matter of scale. But have you guys seen Anchorman 2? Yeah? You're saying, okay. Anchorman 2 actually really is about the moral panic that came with the dawn of cable news, right? Does that seem, it seems silly to us because we grew up with people shouting at each other in boxes 24/7. But when CNN, I think it's called GNN in Anchorman 2, first entered, people were like, you cannot fill 24 hours with news. There's not enough news to fill 24 hours. What did these companies do? they filled it with like outrage porn, right? And now we're just completely used to it. And it's normalized, we're accustomed to it. But that was people were very worried about this problem then. That like, if you start trying to fill 24 hours with a cable news channel, it's just going to be insane. Nobody's going to pay attention to anything that's important because you're making everything the news. And yeah, yep, they were totally right. But you couldn't, and this goes to the last question, you couldn't put the toothpaste back in the tube. I think this is the bigger conversation is that is a dramatic failure of our regulatory structure. It's reflects on Congress not doing its job anymore and punting so much to these bureaucratic, bloated administrative agencies that are like trying to turn the Titanic around to address a single problem. I think all of that gets to weaknesses in our government when it comes to, it doesn't mean it, the left would say that means the Constitution is old and living, breathing, and just needs to be updated. I don't think that's true, but I think there are bigger generational failures in our government to address these things because we didn't realize how quickly things were changing until about 10 years ago. We were like, whoa, life has suddenly changed dramatically. So I think that's absolutely right. And I think, there's one of the reasons I'm optimistic is because the subscription model really allows you, if you're on Substack, you can curate a list of 5 people you love, and you can select when you get their newsletters. If they send it out every day, you can select to get it all on Sundays. So I think there will be some of these tools, and people in media should be recognizing there's a demand. That's the wonderful thing about the free market, right? If there's a demand for people who are fatigued but still want to stay abreast of current events, we'll find solutions to that. But I think that's happening. It's going to continue to happen, and nobody really knows where it goes, unfortunately. Good question. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. It's always such a privilege to be here, and I appreciate you guys being here. I appreciate you guys having me. Appreciate all of the effort that you're putting into being here and learning and listening. So thank you, and I hope to see many of you soon.